So thank you all so much for joining us. The whole purpose of this series, you all, is for us to stop just kind of sitting in the problem, but as you know, for us to also work towards addressing the solution, okay? And for us, policy is a big part of that. Local policy, agency policy, legislation, etc. Okay. And we want to talk about those state and local policies that our coalition has identified need to shift in order for our girls to thrive. And so that is what we'll be talking about for the next hour and a half. This is a discussion. We hope that you will join in because we are doing this work together in community. And so I'll turn it over to the Gwen's Girls CEO, Dr. Kathy, to just give us a word about who the Black Girls Equity Alliance is and the Gwendolyn J. Elliott Institute.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is a tremendous honor to be amongst you all. Many of you already know who the BGEA is because you make up the Black Girls Equity Alliance. And so without you, we would not be in existence. But I will give a brief history of how we came together and hope you will be, hear something that sparks you wanting to be more involved, or if you're new to our group, to get involved. So back in 2016, or even prior to that, let me talk about the Gwendolyn J. Elliott Institute, which is the research and evidence-based practice and education arm of Gwen's Girls. Our past executive director, Lynn Knezovich, had convened a small group of people to start to look at how can we contribute to research around what's going on with girls. And so at the time, there wasn't as much research being done as not like it is now. And so at the time, she, the group, again, started looking at what were some of the things that we could address, and also look at what was the evidence-based practice around the country dealing with girls, and specifically Black girls. And so in 2015, I believe, that's when she retired and I became the CEO of Gwen's Girls. And we continue to meet and to add different researchers and different officials that are within the systems that serve our youth, so the juvenile justice and child welfare groups. And so during our conversation, again, we were looking at what actually is the issues that are happening with girls in our region. And at the same time, there were foundations, specifically FISA Foundation, led by Christy Troutman, and the Heinz Endowments, Carmen Anderson, were actually asking the same thing, wondering how they can support efforts that are addressing the needs of girls in our region. And we started to convene groups, and at one point there was like 3 different groups that was happening. And I said, let's just all start to come together and work together, because it doesn't make sense for us to be in 3 separate convening groups. And from that, Sarah Goodkind, who is also a co-convener of our juvenile justice work group, and unfortunately she had a schedule conflict and she couldn't be here, but she and Kim Booth, who is the assistant director of juvenile probation, or assistant chief probation officer for Allegheny County, they both have done tremendous work over these past few years of addressing the issues that are happening within the juvenile justice system. But Sarah was commissioned to put together, to analyze what was happening within our region, looking at all the different research that was available at that time, and to put together a report. And that was the first report that really looked at what was happening with Black girls in our region. Around the same time, we were having our Equity Summit, and we chose to highlight the report and really call out the different leaders of the different systems that was represented in the report, to kind of, address the disparities in those, in the sectors that they oversaw. And so that led to us, after the summit, saying, okay, we understand what the issues are. We have a little insight to what the issues are. we need to start to meet to really look at how can we address these issues. And so that the summit was in September, and then that December, we started to, we call, a meeting, and we had over 75 different individuals and organizations that was represented that came together and really started to look at what were the needs of our girls in 4 areas, which we'll go over today. What's happening in the juvenile justice area, the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, the education system, and then looking at health and wellness as a whole. And from there, we continue to work in these working groups. And we came up with the name of the Black Girls Equity Alliance. And that was back in, as I said, 2017. And so since then, those working groups have continued to meet. I believe in the chat, there are links to our monthly meetings. And if you're new to the group and want to get involved, you can, just click on that link, register, and come to the monthly meeting. But you'll also hear more information as Tashara highlights some of the policy outcomes and things that we want to address. And then you'll hear from some of the leaders of those working groups so that you have a better understanding of not only what the issues are, but what we hope to do in addressing the issues and solutions, and how are we going to go about addressing these issues? What system stakeholders do we need to engage? This is about policy change. We know that, many of the efforts and things that we want to see happen systemically cannot happen without having some type of policy and practice change. And so that's what we're here today to do, to say, as a group in this region, these are the areas that we feel need to be addressed so that our girls can receive a holistic education and not be, be at greater risk than any other city in our country to be involved in the juvenile justice system or the child welfare system. So thank you all for coming. Hopefully you will continue to be involved with us. And I will turn it back over to Tashara, who will give you an overview of the policy agenda that we have developed, not just from members within the group, but from our young people as well. Tashara.
Thank you, Dr. Kathy. And yes, so we have dropped in the chat the links to register for the ongoing work group meetings that take place once a month. We hope that if you were not already a member, you will be inspired today to join. And so I want to say first that this work around state and local priorities, you may be familiar, actually started with our federal policy agenda that was released around this time last year. We were really inspired by having a brand new administration, first Black woman as a vice president, and we decided it was time to lace up our chucks, put on our pearls, as some might say, as an ode to Kamala Harris, and talk about how our work locally actually maps up to the federal level. And so we found those federal policies that aligned with the local work. And so this year we wanted to actually now take a look at what's happening in our own backyard. And by that, I mean Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, and the state of Pennsylvania, of course. And our goals here are for the folks inside of the BGEA and outside to really have an analysis that anchors our work as far as policy is concerned and what we are all driving towards. And so as Dr. Kathy mentioned, we have 4 work groups, and as such, our work oftentimes is contained within each of those issue areas. And so you'll hear it today, not just from me, but also a few of our work group leaders about what the policy priorities are. And then we're going to jump, y'all, into breakout sessions to have more of a strategy discussion, because based upon where we are right now with the policy agenda, we've outlined the work that needs to be done. The question is, how are we going to get there? So let's start first, you all, with juvenile justice, okay? And here are the 3 priorities. Now, if you came to our all work group meeting in December, this is gonna look very familiar because these are the priorities that we'll discuss today that you all actually helped to solidify during that meeting. So first is to implement a county-wide practice or practices that divert youth from the legal system and connect them to community-based services. No surprise there, that is the work of many of us that are part of the BGEA and who are on this call today. And we really want to ensure as well that it is pre-arrest and pre-citation focused and also culturally responsive. Okay, and this is work that we know has already been going on with the RFP that was recently developed and disseminated. And so we hope to very soon have a lead agency who is going to coordinate this work. And so this priority is well underway already. And then we want to see an elimination of juvenile fees and fines. Much of that work also ties to a national movement towards this direction. We know nationally, but also locally, that Black youth disproportionately live in poverty. And so when we talk about implementing fees and fines, they're going to be the ones who are most likely do not have the capacity to pay it. And those fees and fines can follow our young people into adulthood and preclude them from the kind of opportunities that they truly do deserve. Also, we want to see beyond PPS, an elimination of disorderly conduct infractions county-wide, because we know so often that those infractions are a driver into the juvenile justice system. Again, beyond PPS and county-wide. That's where we are for juvenile justice, and we will dig deep into the strategy about how to get to these goals beyond number one in just a bit. So now let's go to health and wellness, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brittany Brinkman and Jose Garth, who are the work group leaders for this work group.
Thanks, Mr. Sarah. So in our health and wellness group, one thing that we really try to center, and I feel this is a theme throughout a lot of these groups, is just remembering that we're working for and working with human beings. So there are certain things that we just need to take into account. So one kind of, maybe it's not so low-hanging fruit, is just hygiene products. Realizing that a large part of our population menstruates, and that providing this especially for young folks who are menstruating, so they don't have to necessarily go through barriers to access pads and tampons. Most schools don't provide this. Most public buildings don't provide this. And it's something that I feel adds to the shame and stigma around folks who menstruate, which is a strange thing for us to hold. Also, hand washing stations. I don't know if y'all have seen the news, but we're in the midst of a pandemic. And hand washing is one thing that I feel nobody's pushing back on or arguing about as far as a really effective way to prevent the spread of bacterial and viral infections, including COVID, but not limited to COVID. It's rare to go into a school where folks can actually wash their hands in a hygienic way. Just missing basic things like soap, or even just the hands-free sinks, or even just sinks that you can partially use hands-free. So these are kind of like some of the pieces that we think are really important. Just remember that human beings need these basic hygiene supports. The other big piece that we're working on is around sexuality, sexual health education, and gender-based violence prevention. Really pushing that for all folks. This is, we're focused on girls, obviously, and folks who are younger. But this is a lifelong pursuit as far as just our reproductive and sexual health, as well as just the prevention of violence. So we're really looking for high quality and comprehensive education, making sure that we don't have folks coming in giving just a snippet of what sexual and reproductive health is. There's a lot of crisis pregnancy centers that have access to our schools, who are talking about abstinence, which is great, but they don't go any further than that. And they really put it on the students to say, basically, if you don't abstain from sex, that's on you if you face any consequences. And obviously that is not a comprehensive approach. And that's something that does not work for all of our students. So we want to make sure we're here for all of our students and we're being complete in the information we're giving, and making sure that it's culturally responsive and evidence informed, making sure that we're doing things that are up to date, that we're careful with our language so as not to exclude anybody, and make it feel like, make it so that everybody has access to this and feels a part of the conversation, and that we're adapting and progressing along as the years go. Because a lot of stuff that we're using right now in different school districts are policies and programs that are decades plus old. So, yeah. I'll put it over to Ms. Brittany for our other pieces.
Absolutely. So we, as a group, we've always been invested in thinking about wellness for Black girls and how do we create community conditions so that Black girls can thrive. And part of that is attending to positive supports for mental health. We know that for girls across the country, the Surgeon General put out a report at the end of 2021, really noting some concerns about the mental health of our young people. A survey in 2019 showed that half of female respondents were reporting persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness, which was an increase of 40% from 2009, and that was pre-pandemic, right? So when we think about what has happened in the last few years, the additional stressors that Black girls are facing on top of the stressors they were facing before COVID in terms of racism, sexism, economic inequalities, school disparities, and the experiences of trauma, we really need to be thinking about how we can provide positive mental health support as a whole community. So the types of policies that we are advocating for is making sure that there's access to mental health support and resources, that services inside of school and outside of school are healing centered and trauma informed, and that there's training and resources for adults who work with children that's culturally responsive and SOGI responsive. I know there's a lot of great training right now in mental health first aid, but making sure that that work really needs to be culturally and SOGI responsive.
Just a quick language check. When we say SOGI, we're talking about sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression for those who might not be familiar.
Thank you so much, Jose and Brittany. And I should also say, you all, please feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. Since we do have our work group conveners here, they can get a little bit deeper in the work than I may be able to. And I want to make sure that we are making the best of having them present since they've been so deep in all of these discussions, okay? So thank you to Jose and to Brittany. Now I will turn it over to Ms. Tawanda, when I get to the right slide, here we go, to talk to us about the child welfare priorities.
Right. And so what we've really been focused on as a group and really addressing the needs as it relates to anti-bias training for mandated reporters, understanding that we all bring our unique set of understandings, biases to the work based on where we come from, but really helping to take a deep dive and helping people to see what might be cultural poverty and what is actually safety and what may actually put our children at risk. And what are some of the things that we can do to mitigate some of the challenges that our girls may be facing as a result. So our group took a deep dive and really is trying to focus on what is the best way to provide the community and professionals with information about what is safety and what makes that different from poverty or something that might be cultural. Really taking a look at the Family First Act, the implementation to fund culturally responsive child welfare, making sure that we have child welfare workers that come from the communities in which our children come from, understand the needs that our children and their families come from, and are able to support. So there's this idea around mandated supporting and not so much mandated reporting, because what we really want to do is we want to build strong community for our young people and for the families in which they reside in. And then kinship care placements. I think Allegheny County has done a great job. One, we provide per diem for kinship families, just as we do for traditional foster families. We always look for kinship placements first. So we're at a 57% rate at kinship placements in Allegheny County. But when we look across the state of Pennsylvania, what we find is that kinship families are not respected in the same way that they might be respected in Allegheny County. So children can be placed in a kinship family, but the same resources and supports may not be put in place for kinship families. So the per diem may not be offered in other parts of the state as it is offered in Allegheny County. So really looking at how do we do this countywide, but even statewide, really how important it is to place children with kinship families. And kinship It's anyone that has a connection to the child. So it might be the godparents, the neighbors that are in the community, people that are in relationship with the child. And if we look at our own children, I will always crack the joke that if I were to ask my children when they were younger, they're much older now, but anyone that has a 5-year-old or even a 3-year-old, who do you want to live with? If you couldn't live with mommy, who would it be? That 3-year-old, that 5-year-old can always identify a person that is close to them that they think that they would be good with staying with. And then ongoing cultural education supports doing transracial adoptions. And so helping those families that adopt children of color really understand the intricate needs of children of color. And so a lot of times, I go to adoption day and it's a great day. And we see children of color that may be surrounded by people who love them, who don't look like them. And it's great that our children can be in a family, but there are some other needs that exist as well. And so making sure that families are supported when they are adopting children of color. I don't know how many people had an opportunity to see the Kaepernick video that is on Netflix, where he talks about being a part of a transracial adoption and some of the challenges that were a part of that. So really making sure that we provide those ongoing supports. Simple things like how to care for hair is different for a child of color than it might be for a white child. And families need to have that information. So that is some of the things that we, are really looking at and really hoping to make an impact in with the child welfare group.
Thank you, Ms. Tawanda. And I just want to take a pause here to note that, of course, intuitively we understand, but it has to be said that we're talking about the same young people, right? Because we're talking about children who are school age, who may be dual system involved. And so we're talking about how can we holistically create broader opportunities for them to thrive, not just survive, as Dr. Kathy often says. And then Melissa Sigmund says in the chat, are the cultural education / supports for interracial adoptions available beyond the child's 18th or 21st birthday? I'm not sure if you know the answer to that question, Ms. Tawanda.
So I don't know the answer to that question. I can certainly try to get the information to you, but I don't have that information offhand.
What was the question?
The second thing I want to say.
Are the cultural education supports for interracial adoptions available beyond the child's 18th or 21st birthday?
So there are some programs and support groups that are available, but then they would be based on the youth, not the parent.
Gotcha.
So for instance, Three Rivers Adoption Council does have youth support groups and does have some trainings. I wouldn't exactly call them trainings. Maybe like information sessions and webinars more so.
And Tamara does have her hand up too. Thank you, Sarah. Tamara may want to add something.
So I would say that unfortunately, we do not specifically have something for interracial. We do have supports that are very general and broad, right? So we might have educational supports that range up until 21, or they have to sign a different waiver, but there aren't many supports that build out past that basic level of undergraduate work. And even then it's limited. So that's something that has been looked at. How can we better support, right? Not just checking in once a semester with them and giving them a stipend, but what else can we do to be our ongoing support and helping the families bridge the gap? Because as Tawanda said, if you saw the Netflix series with Colin Kaepernick, there were so many things and layers to it. It just didn't happen while they were in their home. He also had to work through some things once he left as well. So the hope is that we can put some better things in place, but we don't have concrete things past the basics at this moment.
Thank
And
you.
let me just add to another area where there is a gap is we know like when the child gets adopted at a younger age, so at 3, 4, 5, 6, there may not be the same issues that come up when they turn 14, 15, 16. And so to have a place where the adoptive family can go to get supports, even though their adoption happened 10 years prior. That is something that is definitely needed. And so those are the things, once again, that will be explored in this child welfare work group.
Thank you, Dr. Cackley. I was about to say the same thing. If that is a topic that is of interest to you, we would love to have your brain power in helping us to determine what this should actually look like to better support our young people who have been involved in transracial adoptions. And then the last issue area that we have priorities around, you all, is education. And this work group has been very busy, especially our partners like 1PA and the ACLU. And so from their collaborative efforts, we determined 4 priorities. Number 1, to expand the suspension ban to include grades 3 to 5 and implement the ban to fidelity, not just on paper, so in real life, IRL, as the young people say, in schools countywide, okay? Currently, we know it's grades K through 2 on paper, but there has been some discrepancy about whether or not that really has been happening in Allegheny County, and specifically with PPS. And so we want to ensure that that ban is actually really doing what it needs to be done, number 1, but also that it is expanded. 2, remove police from schools and increase the number of mental health professionals. There has been a national movement really around this. I'm sure everyone is familiar with Dr. Monique Morris and the push out work that she has led, the research and the writing, the scholarship. Also that goes in tandem with the adultification bias work of Dr. Jamelia Blake. And so often we were looking at young Black girls, specifically school-age Black girls, and pushing them out because of our own biases that we project upon them. It is misogynoir happening at a very young age. And so we know that there is a role that law enforcement plays in that, and it places them squarely on the pipeline from schools to carceral involvement, okay? And one of the ways to mitigate that is not only not by having them in the building, but replacing them with what needs to be there. And as Brittany mentioned, having those mental health supports that are culturally responsive. Also, we heard from the young people themselves about the need to eliminate the dress code and how harmful that has been. Talking about adultification bias, too often our young people are being punished for natural human development and things that are beyond their control. We had a conversation in one of our recent education meetings where someone discussed talking to a young person and saying to her, so you got in trouble about the dress code, you know, what was going on? And she said, well, I was wearing a tank top because my classroom didn't have AC. So as Jose mentioned, just basic human dignity and respect is hot. I wore a tank top. That should be the that on that, okay? Yet we are providing this overly punitive response to just a basic human need to be cool and to be comfortable in a learning environment. And so we see the need to eliminate the dress code. And also to remove subjective infractions from school codes of conduct. And that goes hand in hand with some of the juvenile justice work as well. Implicit bias science, brain science, neuroscience teaches us that whenever there is a gray area, whenever there is an opportunity, that's where implicit biases thrive. And so we want those subjective infractions to be removed from school codes of conduct. And I see a question in the chat box. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Kathy.
I was just saying it's a comment that, you know, is frustrating. So Joni added that a comment that one threat to school-based mental health is the movement to remove mental health services because mental health issues should be left to the parents and the family. Like, are you kidding me?
Kind of like not teaching critical race theory.
Right. And I also think,
I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. All of these things are a whole nother, and you know, we'll all get heated about it. So let's just, you know, just acknowledge the nonsense that it is.
But I also think, how often are schools young people's families? That is where they spend the majority of their day. So this idea that responsibility should be removed from where they are is mind-blowing, right? It's antithetical to the way that schools should be seen in our society. And Melissa also makes a good point where she says, if schools can't mandate masks, I'd expect there to be challenges to dress codes. Yes. That part, y'all. So folks have, and I'm happy, a lot of feedback to share on these policies. And as I mentioned, today's conversation is going to be around how we actually get here. Okay. And so we're going to split to breakout groups to answer these 3 questions. Number 1, which agency / public system needs to be targeted to actually get this policy priority implemented? Number 2, does a local and or state level policy need to change? So where are we actually kind of changing the lever? Is it local or is it state? Can something be done within Pittsburgh or Allegheny County, or does it need to go to Harrisburg? And then, is there already proposed legislation on this topic? We don't want to recreate the wheel here. If there is something that you or a coalition that you are a part of is doing that is in alignment with these priorities, please let us know so that we can find a way to work in greater collaboration and promote the work that's already being done. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing my screen and also open up for breakout rooms. All right. And we choose Mr. Wanda, go right ahead.
No, I just said the time went by fast. We didn't have time to even assign us someone to report out. So I guess it'll just have to be Ann. No.
But I was also going to say that was a
I
good.
thought you were going to say me.
I think I've requested, so I'm a little rusty after all of this pandemic business. And I feel like I came in shy and I've lost my shyness now. I might be blushing a little bit though. We talked a little bit about policy, but then I started sort of drifting off and trying to hurry up and find information. So I missed some of it. There was, but we talked about how some of the policies on dealing with criminal backgrounds is a barrier sometimes. And we were also talking about funding, I believe, and there was definitely some conversation on family finding, which is absolutely a policy of ours. And what I would have added next is that we don't do a good job at it. And it's something that when, we monitor it with the supervisors and make recommendations, but it's really something that we have to keep on top of. I can't tell you how often we are at day 55 and a father has not been contacted in an investigation. So that's a very local thing that we can do a better job at. That's a very office-based thing that we can do better at. Whereas the barriers with placing with somebody with a criminal history might actually be a little bit bigger. But Tawanda, please, what did I miss in terms of reporting out on?
I think you did a great job. You captured everything.
Really?
Kristen, did you have anything you wanted to add? I think you really shared a lot in terms of, really pushing against certain policies that might be in place with the system and really being a strong advocate for young people when it comes to kinship placements.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I really think that Ann did a good job summing it up. I do think we spent a lot of time talking about kinship care and doing a better job across the state as it relates to kinship care, because while Allegheny County in particular does a better job than most counties across the state, there's still work that can be done here and certainly a lot that can be done across the state to better make sure that other youth across the state are with family in kinship homes and if they can't be at home. So that's something we really focused on, and we're just touching on at the end a little bit about Act 55. And really, looking at changes along the way that we could better implement to continue to look at family finding and kinship care.
Thank you, Kristen. So I will turn it over to the Health and Wellness Work Group, Dr. Brittany and Jose, if Jose is still with us.
I think Jose maybe had to go. Joni, do you want to share a little bit? Thank you for taking notes for us.
Sure. And I tried to write a couple things in the shared document, but and please feel free to join in. but I think we had three sort of main points that we were talking about. And the first one was around sex ed and how there's no consistency on what is taught in schools. And there, for example, you're not allowed to talk about condoms, but you're allowed to have crisis pregnancy programs come into schools. And that it's true, and this is apparently across the country, that people of color tend to get less sex education than those who are not. And that the language that we use, and this is true across the line, needs to be inclusive of everyone. And then the second thing that we talked about a little bit was around mental health. And I'm going to ask you, Dr. Brinkman, you are working with an organization called JavaWorks. And you're working with 9 youth serving organizations, training them on, I got the culturally competent, but I missed the other thing. And I want to get your email actually, because I was really interested. If you could just add that one piece.
Yes, yeah, we're doing culturally responsive mental health training for adults and youth serving organizations and teachers.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And then the third thing that I caught that we talked about really started then around dress code and the problems that dress codes create. Obviously, different schools have different dress code standards, and also a dress code often is, I should say, targeted depending on the person's culture or the sex of the person. And that tends to make that conversation even more difficult. We started talking a little bit about whether uniforms were a good thing or not. And I think we had a couple of comments in both directions, and then we got cut off. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that was great. The only couple of things I would add, we mentioned that there is some efforts at the state level to change a law to have comprehensive sex ed statewide. We're not super hopeful that it will pass, but we are supporting that effort. We also started to talk a little bit about what might shift with the new mayor. And, you know, I know Gamey has talked about wanting to collaborate more with PPS in particular. And so in terms of how policy can actually happen and change, whether that's going to be a source of maybe support for some of the changes that we would like to see that impact youth and that intersect with the schools. So.
And both of
Thanks,
those
Jody, so much
are in the shared doc, the Google Doc around the organization. Is it called PAXI? And also around, now that we have a person of color in leadership, that we need to use that to our advantage.
Yeah, thank you, Joni.
Or expect that from him. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you, Joni and Dr. Brittany. And again, much like the child welfare conversation about those things that we can provide better support for kinship placements, this conversation about comprehensive sex ed is going to be continuing in the work group. So we invite you all to join. Dr. Kathy, I'll turn it over to your work group to report out.
All right, I'll take a stab at it. Melissa and a few others were in our group. So basically, there's a lot of work that is being proposed across the county as well as state. And so for the first question around which area public systems need to be targeted, you know, obviously the magistrates and the judges, because they're the ones that also, well, first the police, but then the judges and magistrates, because they're the ones that, you know, levy the decisions and fines and fees and things like that. Looking at addressing the juvenile court system as a whole, and providing some training and support on alternatives to, having a child go through the juvenile justice system. And then last but not least, the state reps, senators, people who are in elected offices that can help to make these policy changes come to fruition. Does a local or state level policy need to be changed? And so we say yes, and a lot of these things, again, are already being worked upon. We need to follow up with Brad Korinsky, who, and I don't know if he's still there or not. I know that his director, he works in the controller's office, and Chelsea Wagner is now a judge. So I'm not sure, what that means for him if he's still there, but him and Michael Jonas were working on a report that highlighted the fees and fines in Allegheny County, and then some recommendations on how do we eliminate this process. Last but not least, is there any already proposed legislation or policy change on this topic? And I pretty much have said that we need to get an update on what's happening with the recommendations from Governor Wolf's task force on juvenile justice reform, because it encompasses all of this, from fees and fines, charges that should be coming through juvenile court. And we know that there's some recommendations that had bipartisan support, and there were some that did not. And my last conversation or hearing any updates was that the committee, which was inclusive of some senators, were looking at picking the recommendations that they felt could pass the other side, and just haven't had any updates. So that is something that we need to do to, maybe have at the next juvenile justice work group meeting. Well, not the next one, because the next one's tomorrow, but the one for March, to get an update on what's happening with those recommendations.
Thank you, Dr. Kathy. We know that state level work has been going on for a while. So yes, us continuing to be in the loop is so vital. So the last
work group. Add one more thing. Melissa had a good suggestion, and it was part of our conversation. For folks that don't know, there's efforts that are happening at the county level, but there's also efforts that are happening at the state level. And usually PCCD is the funding stream or conduit. So if you're not familiar with the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency and haven't visited their website, you need to do so, because they're the ones that set the, or I wouldn't say enforce what the laws are, but they typically are the ones that can give a feel for what should be happening around juvenile justice throughout the state.
Thank you for that reminder about PCPWay. It's too many.
PCCD.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to go now to education, and I will turn it over to Emily to share some of what we discussed in our work group.
Hi, everyone. So we talked a lot about mental health in schools and what that currently looks like in Allegheny County, and what might need to change to see improvements there. So currently there are 43 school districts within Allegheny County. That doesn't even touch on any of the charter schools. But of those 43 school districts, all but 2 currently have mental health outpatient providers that are within their buildings. But a lot of the teachers as well as students are not aware of those programs, even within their own buildings. There's student assistance programs in all of the high schools, with liaisons from outside providers that can assist to do screenings to see if there's a mental health need, to identify students that might be able to start working with the outpatient provider in the building or need to be referred to a higher level of care. So we talked about how these programs, as well as a few others, like another program called Stand Together, that's an anti-stigma campaign for schools to help with mental health supports. There's a lot of supports within our buildings, but families, students, as well as a lot of the teachers are not familiar with them. So we would need to start with making sure we're figuring out how schools are educating their own staff. The other piece is that even with all of those providers in place, there continues to be multiple different levels of need, and there continues to be a lack of staffing with those supports that exist. And the lack of staffing tends to be a direct result of a lack of funding. So a lot of mental health providers are leaving for private practice where they can make more money, where it's harder access for other folks to receive those supports, particularly for our students of color. And our kids that are in needy areas don't have access to transportation. Having those supports in the school is a really important piece. So looking at funding would need to come from a state level to get that funding to come towards those mental health services. And then that would need to be a further conversation that would then happen at the county level as far as identifying how those funds are distributed to make sure that some of that does go to our schools and goes to our kids that are in need, and making sure they're able to access services. I think that's most of what we discussed in a nutshell, but if I've missed anything important, please let me know.
I think that was perfect. And speaking of funding, we also talked about how this ties to the federal legislation around counseling, not criminalization, and how those dollars, if they were truly freed up, could incentivize states to then incentivize counties and local school districts to provide for more mental health supports and services. And so there's this pipeline here around funding that we need to be able to explicitly call for. And so thank you, Emily, for that report out. And I also say around this 43 school boards being in, or school districts, and then also school boards being in Allegheny County, for me as someone who does not sit in the state of Pennsylvania, that sounds wild to me, to try to corral this many school districts on one issue. And so we talked about how we might strategically determine who is like the most ready for these types of conversations, who already is receiving the kind of support necessary, possibly from Emily's office as she discussed, and how we could then get different school districts to align on a smaller level and hopefully expand out. So more conversations there to come very soon. And also, and Joni says, and who will run for school board? Yeah, determining that as well. Absolutely. We saw that with Black Women for Better Education. Any other thoughts, you all? Thoughts or questions about where we landed today, starting this strategy conversation? And thank you all so much for being engaged and taking time out of your day. So we will meet here, you all, every third Wednesday between now and September, the conference, to hold space for our She Matters webinar series. This is going to be our opportunity to really anchor a discussion and to be among other advocates, researchers, community members, etc., to talk about how we can do the work necessary in our community for our girls to have the best possible outcomes, work that we know you're already doing individually, that we want to hold space for here, and to also have some knowledge sharing and training, etc. Next month, we'll be hearing from Tawanda and others for our conversation called The Why Behind the Behavior, which is going to be about the role trauma plays in adolescent and youth development. Okay, so let's do a one-word checkout about how you're feeling. One-word checkout, please. Dr. Kathy, did you want to say anything to close us out?
No, just thank you everybody for attending, and look forward to seeing you all in these groups as we plug away at addressing these issues for our young people. And just a reminder that there is a juvenile justice work group meeting tomorrow, and we will have a presentation by Gada Makoshi and Harold Jordan from the ACLU. They recently published a report about school discipline. So an update on some of the work that we've been looking at. So if you're available tomorrow at 3 o'clock, it's the same link that is for the regular juvenile justice work group meetings. Please join us.
And that was shared in the chat. Okay. And please, you all stay tuned for the actual published policy agenda, which will be coming out very soon. So let's close out with a little bit of Whitney. Since we came in with Whitney, we got to leave with a little bit of Whitney. All right. And y'all give us a one word to say how you're feeling as you go on to proceed with the rest of your day. Okay. Thank y'all so much.
Hopeful. If tomorrow is